Thank you for joining us this morning. Hope you've enjoyed the weekend, the beautiful snow that fell, blanketed, or maybe blanketed's too big of a term, but at least gave us a scattering of the white stuff. Let our teachers and kids have another day off from school on Friday, and I know they appreciated that. But even though in the cold weather, it's beautiful, warm, and so very good to be together this morning to study. It's still okay to say Happy New Year. I think it is. And we hope your 2023 is going great. To those online by conference call, we're happy that you are with us as well. We've been studying this month, what counts? It's a question that I suppose pops up this time of year as people try to reevaluate their life and its priorities. We talk a lot about changing things, resolutions, and things of that sort. But what counts? What really, truly matters? We looked at the first Sunday of the new year that God's love counts. Jesus said loving God, that's it. That's primary. That has to be done first. Loving our neighbor as ourselves. Faith working through love. That's what Jesus said. We have to appreciate. We have to incorporate into the very soul of our being and let it motivate us to do all that we do. Last week we thought about together that while faith counts and while love counts in the sense that God's love is not going to be diminished by anything that we do. However, that does not give us license to live any way we want. Instead, responding to God's love means that obedience counts, holiness counts, because the Bible said keeping the commandments of God, 1 Corinthians 7:19, that's what counts. This morning, let me remind you that what counts can always be counted. What can be counted doesn't always count. It's easy to get caught up with certain metrics or numbers, but there are things that truly cannot be counted, but they matter a great deal. This morning, to introduce the thought or the thing that counts for us, several years ago, I guess maybe 7 or 8, it might have even been longer than that. I don't remember who he was. He was a celebrity, some famous person at some of these award shows that I don't really watch, and probably maybe most of you don't either. But anyway, this guy had received some award from either his acting or maybe his sports performance. I forget exactly what. But he came to the podium and he accepted the award, Grammy, Tony, whatever it was. And he began to weep. I don't mean just shed a tear or two. He began to weep. And he was unconsolable. And he stood there and finally I think he just kind of muttered a very kind of jumbled up thank you. And they had to go to commercial and he was ushered off stage. And that's all he could say. Well, that ignited somewhat of a little bit of a debate, a national debate. When is it okay for men to cry? Okay, guys, when is it right for us to cry? And one lady took it upon herself in one national publication to write and to give the criteria whereby it is acceptable for men to cry. You know what she concluded? She concluded it's okay to cry at sports events under one condition. I know we've got some Georgia fans here. This isn't last Monday night. This is the year before. If you don't know this guy and his backstory, it's okay to cry if you win. And given the amount of, history that this young man had and how he got to where he was last year when his team won the national championship, and yes, they're black and red and white there. Those are the Georgia Bulldogs. Mr. Bennett was okay to cry, but you see, if you cry when you lose, you're a whiner. So you can't cry as a man if you lose, only if you win. And after all, who cries at sports events anyways? Nobody well, go on past that, nobody cried when that happened, did they? No, I didn't do that. You didn't either. It's okay to cry in extreme pain, this lady said. Even if you're a man, it's okay to cry in extreme pain, heart attack, kidney stones. I think that's pretty good. Guys, it's okay and it's also expected to cry when you hold your newborn. You remember that feeling, dads? There was a simultaneous sense of relief and an overwhelming sense of fear and dread and joy and love. All of those emotions just dumped into a pot and stirred up. Now, be careful. She does warn, and some of us have made the mistake of trying to compare our joy and sorrow and maybe our tears with something our wife might have experienced at the same ordeal. It doesn't match up, okay? So be careful how you use that. It's okay to cry when you're holding your newborn. It's even okay to cry sometimes at a movie, this lady said, for men. Now here's where my childhood trauma began. You remember this? In elementary school, when the teachers didn't have anything planned, they'd throw on Old Yeller. Now, kids, if you've not watched Old Yeller, it's a classic. You need to watch it. And without giving away the storyline, Travis has to do what he has to do. His pa's away. Mom's going to do it, but that famous line, he said, "It's my dog. I'll do it." And those of you that have watched the movie, you know what happens next. And if you didn't cry, then you're heartless, I guess. More modern, kids will recognize this. And especially if you're kind of on the fringes like I was as a young adult, watching it with my kids, and then coming on down to when they were approaching this age, when Andy leaves Bonnie all of his toys and gets in his car and drives off to college, and you get to see him kind of look in the rearview mirror and look back on his childhood. That'll rip your heart out, whether you're the kid going off to college, but especially if you're a parent watching your child do that, as Amy and I have done that a couple of times in the last few years. So it's okay to cry at a movie, but she warned there are times when you don't cry and you never fake cry. If you know that guy, that's kind of what he was famous for, at least in that particular show. Now, women can do it too. This is a more recent example. You might have seen her do some of that on the stand. So when is it okay to cry? Well, what are we talking about? What counts? This morning we're talking about suffering. And we talked about self-defense, and this isn't kind of correlating the two. But when is it okay to cry? When is it okay to be upset? Well, what counts is suffering. Now, you may say, why does suffering count? Or are you sure even that it counts? Preacher, that doesn't seem likely, at least in my case, because I'm a person, I don't enjoy suffering. Well, no one holds up their hand and says that they do. And yet James says, James, the half-brother of our Lord, in his letter to various Christians, Jews scattered abroad, those at least who were of a Jewish heritage, who were now followers of Jesus. My brethren, count. There's our word that we've been using this month, kind of as our key word, count. Understand that it is with all joy, or at least with all joy, you should consider this fact. Well, what's the fact? What do I consider? That is, when you fall into various trials. Count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Here are some other renderings of it. My brothers, be very happy when you are tested by having troubles of many kinds. Now the word brothers there, just to be sure, ladies, that includes you as well. He's using brothers there for all members of his Christian family. So as God's people, we are to be very happy. One version even says to be supremely happy. Supremely happy when? When you fall or have troubles of various kinds? Yes, that's exactly what he says. Now, count is this categorical command. It means to make a definite decision. And here, James says, while you make that definite decision, adopt a positive attitude wherein joy would be your response, even though in those instances it is maybe the most unnatural way to respond. Christianity oftentimes is what we might call counterintuitive. It goes against the grain. It cuts, us in a way that we would think odd. We swim upstream against the current. We behave in a way that the world deems peculiar, odd. But we are the people who can count even with joy and find supreme happiness in troubles and trials of various kinds. Here's the way J.B. Phillips in his translation puts it. He said, when all kinds of trials and temptations crowd into your lives, my brothers, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. Now that again seems like something that's very difficult to do, if not impossible. Now, naturally we would tend to believe that, if there are trials and temptations, surely he's just talking about the ones that are superficial, or things that are upsetting, but not really all that problematic. I'm sorry, that's not the way he uses the language. He is talking about those difficulties of life, whether they be the minor inconveniences or nuisances, or the very serious things that we might face. And those troubles and trials, he doesn't provide us any specificity as it relates to their exact nature, but you have, like I have, experienced many of them, most of us. Now, it may be that you don't need the lesson this morning. Maybe this morning, right at this moment, you say, I'm in a good spot. I'm on top of the mountain. Life could not be better. Everything is working just the way I want it to. If you're in that category this morning, count yourself fortunate. More than that, count your Heavenly Father as blessing you with this temporary reprieve from suffering, because we live in a world cursed by sin where there is trial and temptation. And you may not need it this morning, but you might next month. You might sometime in July. You might need it in November. It might be even a year or more, but sometime you'll need it. And I'll show you that momentarily. Now, whether we're talking about physical sickness, mental illness, financial reverses, relationship issues, spiritual pressures, whatever it may be. James was probably talking to people, and we're going back to this if you've not noticed. Our culture, as it moves farther and farther away from God, we're actually getting closer to what the Christians in the first century and first several centuries really understood and what pressures they faced. They were shunned. They were ostracized. They were ignored. They were canceled. They were opposed because their message was so radically different than the conventional culture that they lived in. And darkness hates light. Do you know that? It does. And while we give thanks to God for the freedom and even for the founding of our nation and the principles that in years past guided it, seemingly as we move farther away from those and Christian principles are held in disrepute, that's going to affect us. And the trials that we face, even that we see now on the horizon and quickly approaching, James says, be joyful in them. Be joyful. Well, how can I do that? James tells us two things about suffering and why it should count. Count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Verse 3 and 4, if you have your Bible open there, if not, please do so. James says, because we know this, the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Two things we can count on as it relates to troubles. Number one, they are unavoidable. I've already said that, and it didn't take me telling you that to prove that it's true. You know from your own life experience, if you've lived any amount of time at all, suffering is a reality. And it's unavoidable. It's inevitable. It's not a matter of when. James doesn't say, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Or it's not a matter, of if. Let me say it correctly. James says when you fall. Not if you're going to fall, but when you fall. It's unavoidable, inevitable that you will. But he says there is also an aspect to suffering that is elective. Count it all joy. That's your choice, whether to do that or not. Counting it all joy and allowing the testing of your faith, the refining of its genuineness to produce patience. A word that's really difficult to have an exact English equivalent for. This word for patience doesn't mean just being passive. It's a word that means to bear up under something, to have the strength to endure. And so your version might say, the testing of your faith produces perseverance, endurance, patience, steadfastness. All of those are synonyms, and yet all of them perhaps are a little lacking in what the word really means. Count it all joy. Allow your suffering to count when you are facing trials, because when your faith is tested, when it is purified, when it is refined in this fire of suffering, you can be steadfast, you can persevere, you can have the strength whereby you can call on to face the ordeal, whatever it is, knowing you've encountered it before, and with the help of God, you've got through it, and you will this time as well. But that's all you see elective, that's optional. It's not something that you have happen, if you will, automatically. It's not going to happen to you. It's what you're going to do to the trial that you are facing, to the suffering that you encounter. That's your choice and mine. Let patience, let endurance, let steadfastness have its perfect work. It has a task. God allows it for a reason. If we were interested in the philosophical debate posed long ago, as far back as the book of Job, and probably even before, but certainly brought to the very forefront in that man's life. If he's a good God, Job reasoned, why do I suffer as a good man? Job's friends had no answer other than, Job, you're not a good man. And Job had no answer other than, well, maybe God's not a good God. And both were wrong. Job was a good man, and God is a good God. And yet, testing and trial and suffering comes. But it has a purpose. It can mature us. It can make us complete. It can make us where we lack nothing, not of our own resources, but knowing that we can call on the unlimited resources of God. That's its purpose. And with God's help, we can make suffering count. Now, to make suffering count, let me give you three questions to ask. Three questions to ask when I suffer that will help me make it count. Now, maybe I should say, just by way of a brief disclaimer, I think as we think about our suffering, we're not talking about necessarily the things that I do that are self-induced. I think we can maybe eliminate that from the discussion somewhat. In other words, James is saying the trials that you face, these seem to be a little bit external. Now, that's not to say that I will never suffer from my own self-induced, problems and my own self-induced foolishness. I have. I still do. I'm just weak in that way, and likely so are you. And so when I'm irresponsible, when an individual, and let's just make it more general, not talking about me and not talking about you, but talking about all of us, if you will, at the same time, when we abuse our bodies, whether that's through food or substance, lack of activity, whatever it might come, and physical ailments and illness and disease result, I'm partially responsible. I'll suffer in that way. What do I do then? What do I do when I waste, as I mentioned, those financial resources that I have? When I'm not a good steward of the blessings God gives me in the way that He tells me to steward those blessings, and I suffer want or have a need. Yes, that's a time of suffering. When I'm, in a relationship, and I don't do what Jesus said and treat other people the way I want to be treated, and I act like a jerk, and I suffer for it, who's to blame? I am. And yet, even in those self-induced problems, I can still count it joy. And what I should do, of course, in looking at my own foolishness and folly and my own responsibility in the matter, is see the change that needs to be made and change it. But we're talking about here maybe some other things. Maybe we're speaking more of those things in life that we just encounter where it's difficult to see a cause and effect relationship. And we all encounter them. We've mentioned just a few. How do I, when I face various trials, make those trials, those temptations, those times of suffering, how can I make suffering count? Three questions, and here they are. Number one is this. In a time of suffering, what can I learn to make it count? What can I learn? Sometimes you may have done this. You may have went to a friend, family member, a fellow Christian, and they're having a tough time. And you're wanting to help. You're wanting to be of assistance. And there's just some awkwardness, of course, in the visiting, whether that's in a hospital room or in some other place. And it's sometimes very challenging to know the right words to say. And all of us struggle with that. But I know people have sometimes, and I've been searching for those words. And in that moment of awkward silence, the individual in their time of suffering will sometimes exclaim very loudly. Sometimes they'll just barely whisper it. But they'll say something along these lines. Do you think God is trying to teach me something? Do you think God is really trying to teach me something? What's the answer? Yes! Yes, He's trying to teach you something. He's always trying to teach you something. Every day I believe God is trying to teach us something. That's why He wants us to study His Word every day, to drink deeply from its riches, to live by its precepts and truths. And even when I'm suffering, yes, God wants to teach me something. I believe it was a Puritan author of several centuries ago now, who said, in effect, he said, I am surely unworthy to know why I suffer. But Lord, help me to know that I suffer not in vain. What does he mean by that? I'm unworthy to know why I suffer. You see, when we enter a time of suffering, that question, why, it gnaws at us. Why? And again, going all the way back to Job and many other biblical characters and examples could be cited, the same question confronted them: why? If I just knew why, I would submit to you that perhaps knowing why is not a cure-all. Think about your last time of suffering, your last trial, your last difficulty, and maybe it's ongoing right at this moment. And suppose you had the answer to that why. Would it make the suffering diminish or lessen in intensity? You know, I guess just because of the way we know people in today's social media can facilitate that in a good way. You know, we're aware of so many people with so many problems. And so many terrible tragedies have come into their lives. I've known, I guess, I've not counted it up. It just came to my mind at this moment. But I know I can probably think of about a half dozen in the last year, just in 2022. Families and friends who have suffered loss and tragedy. Their loved ones taken away in an instant with no rhyme or reason, with no precursor to say, you know, they have some sort of terminal diagnosis through accidents and other unforeseen things. Could I tell those people who are now suffering in their grief, well, here's why that happened? Would that really make a difference? I suspect it wouldn't have made the funeral any easier to attend. It doesn't make it any easier in the middle of the night when they reach for that loved one and they're not there. You see, knowing why doesn't solve all of our problems. It doesn't lessen the pain or the intensity of the sorrow. But the lessons learned in the crucible of pain and suffering are many, if we'll let them be learned. I've heard people say, you know, I've learned through this to rely on God more. And I've heard some very strong people, at least from my estimation of them, even before they encountered that problem. I thought their faith was strong before, but they've told me, I've learned to rely on God more. I've heard people say, in my time of suffering, I've learned to love people more. I don't use people anymore, I love people more. I've learned the difference between joy and happiness. Happiness is fleeting, but God has given me joy that is so even unspeakable. A peace beyond understanding, Philippians 4. I've learned those things. So in your time of suffering, pause for a moment, even when it's hard, and even when it's pressing down upon you, and just pray and simply ask God, God, what can I learn? What can I learn through this ordeal? What can I learn that will let this time of trial be a perfect work in my life to make me where I lack nothing? Again, James isn't saying now, if you reach a point, you go through enough tough stuff in life, you'll be able to handle whatever life throws at you of your own abilities and initiative and resources, and you can that's not what he's saying. He's saying you can learn what really matters. You can learn how to trust God in a more complete way, and you can lean on His resources instead of your own. Certainly the second question is related to the first. In a time of suffering, not only what can I learn, but ask the question in order to make suffering count. How can I grow? How can I grow? Can I take this knowledge and put it into practice when things improve? Can I take this ordeal and this suffering, and through what I had previously known but not really experienced, now be able to put that head knowledge and that heart knowledge together to really help me conduct myself in the way that I should? I don't know. I suppose this happens more often with preachers than with other people, than, I hate to say, with you, the general population. But we read, we study, we try to take God's Word and ingest it. You need to do that too, day by day. It's food for you spiritually. But oftentimes as we study certain ideas and principles and truth from God's Word, it's in the abstract, if you will. It's knowledge that I have and I put in my mind, I put it in my brain and it's there, but I've not had an opportunity to call upon it in a real, if you will, day-to-day situation. But then there are times when I really have to. And there are times when I have to call on that faith. And what I have known to be true, I have to really see it in action. Experiential knowledge, it's called. But how can I grow through the process? I think that's one of the reasons, one of the things James is asking us to consider. Now, let me just give you an illustration of how sometimes this question, we might ask it or we might think we're asking it. We might think we're giving consideration. Yes, Lord, I want to grow. But we really betray that mindset by what we do or what we say. For instance, have you ever heard how we pray? I'm not just talking about this morning. I appreciate the prayers already offered. And those prayers rightly offered were for those who are not well. There are some that are very near and dear to my heart right now that we want to recover. But think about sometimes how we pray. Our prayers don't sound like we want to grow through suffering, do they? They sound like this: Lord, take away every pain. Lord, make every relationship of mine perfect. Father, please let me always be right and let everybody else see that they're wrong. Now, you don't verbalize that, maybe say it with those exact phrases. But sometimes if you were to really analyze your prayers, that's in essence, at least sometimes, how they might sound. Lord, make it easy. Make it comfortable. Make it where the struggle is finished and I am vindicated or justified or proven to be correct. Let me have comfort instead of building my character. I've tried to maybe pray with a greater humility. And I encourage you to do the same. Lord, help me, Father. I don't like this, whatever it is that the trial or the temptation, the struggle or the suffering is. I don't like it. But help me to learn from it. Help me to grow through it. Help me to be able to do what Paul said. Paul uses our word count in Romans 8:18. He used it back in Romans 6. You remember last week we talked about Romans 6 when Paul said in verse 11, I reckon, Paul's a good southern boy, I reckon when he talks about you're dead to sin, you're alive to Christ. That's what happens when I obey Him in baptism. Well, in Romans 8:18 he uses that same word again. But there he says, I reckon, I count, I impute, that's the word that God uses for the righteousness of Christ being credited to my account. God imputes. Paul said, I reckon that the sufferings of this present age, this present time, this present world, my life here and now, they're not worthy to be compared with the glory that will be revealed in us. I can grow, Paul said, and even intensify my desire for heaven and eternal life with God one day. So what can I learn? How can I grow? Number 3, when you suffer, ask this question, it'll make it count. Who can I bless? Who can I bless? Will I use the tough times to help make me more empathetic? To help me appreciate when I encounter someone in a similar situation in the future that I might be able to help in a way I could not previously. Those of you that are part of our class on Wednesday night, as we study 2 Corinthians, know that we made an emphasis of this very point when we went through verses 3 and 4 in the very first chapter. 2 Corinthians 1, at the end of verse 3, Paul calls God the God of all comfort. Of all the beautiful names of God, that's a beautiful one indeed. The God of all comfort, Paul said. Well, what does He do with that comfort? Paul said in verse 4, He comforts us in all of our tribulation. Well, that's great. I like that. God's going to comfort me. Pour out His comfort on me. Paul doesn't end there though, does he? So that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. God comforts me so that I might comfort others. God strengthens me so that I might strengthen others. God helps me in my time of suffering so that when I encounter someone else farther down the road in their time of suffering, I can share that, as hopefully someone who had previously endured something similar might have helped me during my time of suffering, trial, or temptation. Who can I bless? I've had people tell me this, and sadly I don't doubt its truthfulness. And now what I'm about to say, it's a judgment, it's an indictment, it's not how it should be, but I've heard people say this, especially people that are dealing with some addictive behavior, drugs, alcohol, etc. I've heard Christian people who struggle with that, they've told me, I found more love more support and more help in Alcoholics Anonymous or NA or in a support group or in some other setting than I did for my fellow brothers and sisters in the church. That stung when they told me that, because I know I was probably part of the people, part of the group that they were leveling that indictment against. And it was probably true, an accurate evaluation, because sometimes we're afraid of those people in those situations. We're afraid of maybe saying the wrong thing, of them doing something to us, and so we tend to just kind of keep everybody at arm's length. Ministry is messy. Serving the Lord and helping other people do the same sometimes is messy. What we need to do is kind of roll up our sleeves and jump in. I'm not saying don't take precautions. I'm not saying don't be wise. Certainly there are many people, and sin can be so deceptive and so engrossing in a person's life that they can use and hurt and harm, and oftentimes do, people that they say they love and want to receive help from. But who can I bless? Who can I bless? Even the medical community has recognized that if you take two groups of people recovering, and different studies have done this through the years, whether it's from a heart surgery or whatever the case may be, you can take two groups and you can give one group encouragement and put them in a setting where they find mutual support, and you can take another group who are expected to kind of recover in solitary, all by themselves. And it's been proven numerous times that the group that are given, those members that are given support and encouragement and love, recover better and more completely than the group who's kind of put off to the side and only expected to rely on themselves. So how can I make suffering count? I can bless other people. And usually when I talk with someone in their time of suffering, it's easy to turn inward. And I've done that. I'm good at that. I have a pity party and I invite me, myself, and I. You ever had one of those? I have those from time to time, and I have that party with myself. What I try to do is help those people and say, now wait a minute. This is a tough time for you, no doubt about it. We want to help you, but think about when you get on the other side of this, with God's help, who you can bless, who you can help. So what can I learn in suffering? How can I make it count? How can I grow? What can I learn? Who can I bless? You see, the matter stated simply is this in question form. Will suffering get the best of you or bring out the best in you? You see that last part again? There it is. Will suffering get the best of you or bring out the best in you? That's what God wants to know the question to, and I think that's really why He asked it of us. And you can always count on God to make your suffering count. It's not pleasant. It's not enjoyable. It's not something we desire. We're not, with some sort of psychologically altered need in order to have pain in our life. We're not advocating that in the least. What we're telling you, and what James tells you, is that it's not a question of if you're going to suffer, if you're going to face trial or temptation, if hard times are going to come. It's just a matter of when. And when they do, what do you do with them? Suffering can count. I can count it all joy when these trials and temptations and suffering come, if I count on God. And you can always count on God to make your suffering count. If you doubt that, go to the cross and look at His Son. We sometimes, and again, maybe it's said in jest, but maybe too many of us have believed for too long, I can't do it. I can't make it. I can't endure. It's too hard. It's too difficult. Nobody knows what I feel like. Nobody knows the pressure I'm under. Nobody knows the suffering I face. Nobody knows the pain I endure. That may be true for all of us, and your assessment might in fact be accurate, but there'll be one who steps forward and says, wait a minute, you're mistaken. I know. The one with nail-scarred hands and feet. The one with a spear injury on his side can step forward and say, I know all about suffering. I know what it's like. And you think about any kind of suffering that you will ever encounter in this life. And Jesus said, yep, I'm a member of that club too. Rejected by your culture. Yeah, that was me. Rejected and forsaken by your closest friends in your time of greatest need. Yeah, that's me. Physical pain and anguish that's unspeakable, that nothing can alleviate. I've been there. You see, no matter how you describe your suffering, Jesus is going to say, yes, I know that too. He trusted in His Father, and He knew what His Father had asked Him to do and the reward for doing so. And He did it. Was it easy? I can't believe for a moment it was easy. Will it be easy for you? Will it be easy for me? Many times it won't be. But as Paul said, it'll be worth it. The sufferings of this present world are not worthy to be compared with the glory that will be revealed in us. That's a wonderful thought to ponder. You can always count on God to make your suffering count. This morning, if you're not a Christian, really, I guess I should give you this caution. Suffering for those who are not the children of God is just a byproduct of living in a world where sin reigns, and maybe even sin in your own life. What you need to do is to remove the sin from your life through the blood of Jesus. Be obedient to His gospel. Believe in Him as the Savior. Repent of your sins, be baptized, and sin will be washed away. You'll be forgiven. Now, that will not remove you from a world where suffering still exists. There is a mistaken notion that some have believed. If I become a Christian, life will be easy from then on out. It certainly will not. In fact, what I might tell you to the contrary to help you count the cost that Jesus said you must do, it'll be more difficult in some ways. You'll face greater pressure and temptation than ever before, but you have a greater resources and aid and helper than ever before. Jesus Christ, the righteous, the advocate with the Father. And so this morning, if you're not a child of God and can't get through suffering alone, you're right, you can't, but with His help you can. With the help of your Christian family you can. So be obedient to the gospel this very day. Maybe you're a Christian this morning, and maybe the suffering that you're currently facing, the difficulty, the trial, the temptation, whatever it is, you've not made it count. You've not counted it all joy. You've been despondent. You've been blaming God. You've let your faith waver. You've just decided, well, I'm almost going to give up. No one cares anyway. I hope I've not contributed to that in any way, but even if any of us have, it still remains true that Jesus hasn't given up on you. He still loves you. He's still available to help you. And no matter what you face, He knows what it's like. And He can help get you through it if you let Him. But you must let Him by walking hand in hand with Him, letting Him be your guide all through life. Maybe it's because there's sin in your life or other things that's caused you to not do that in the way that you know you should. That you need to pray this morning. You need to repent. You need to seek the Lord's forgiveness. That may even involve other Christians or other people in general that you need to seek forgiveness from. Do that. Maybe a simple cry for help, a plea for, strength. You want us to pray with you and for you to that end. We'd be happy to do that. Is your suffering, is it going to be something you make count? If it's not, because you're not doing it God's way, then again, respond to Him. Let us help you as we can. Make that known to us. Come while we stand, while we sing together.